hills and trees. The world's a perfect design. Do it all so well and you know it. Let your light shine and know you show it. Mercy, joy, and success. Every day is a chance for happiness. Yes, we can live a beautiful, crazy plan. Every day is a celebration. Every day is a celebration.
Welcome to the Great Song Adventure. We're here in Los Angeles and it's getting to be springtime, a little early.
It's paradise here. You know, it's really still freezing cold back in the rest of the country. It is spring. I don't know if they know that yet.
We have a very hot episode today. We only just a couple of days ago interviewed the great Peter Asher.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe of all our episodes, this is the one that we've done our interview the most recently, and it was such a great conversation.
That's one of the many reasons I like working with you, that you could just make that happen really easily. And it was great to talk to him because his career is so remarkable and covered so many facets of this business. He was a singer, part of Peter and Gordon, lived with a Beatle. Paul McCartney lived in his house, dating his sister, Jane Asher. But he was a famous manager and, of course, a remarkable producer. All those James Taylor albums, Linda Ronstadt.
You know, what's so amazing for me doing this podcast with you and talking to people about what it was like in the beginning and those crucial decisions that affected so much history. But from my point of view as a young girl, knowing these people then, they were just there. I didn't think about, how they knew each other. It was just like they were just huge to me in my consciousness as role models. And to talk to Peter and find out, he was just a kid and doing these things.
Yeah.
Looking at opportunities. It's just very interesting to find out how things started. I never thought about what they were like before I saw them as these mega established icons.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say icons, of course, to a little girl, I didn't use that word, but it's Peter Asher, it's Linda Ronstadt.
Right.
And there was a time before.
Yeah. And it's, from your perspective, it's completely different from mine. But you were up close to these people. To me, they were just like, far away and not like real people to us, but remarkable people. Though your mom had a sense like, I think she is a real person, which is one of the great appeals of her, but she did write all those amazing songs. But James Taylor, I mean, he had such an impact on our lives. He was just so much cooler than anyone I'd ever known, like the Beatles were. And those albums, we just lived in them. I'm not sure if people realize it, but back then, when I was growing up, our albums were everything. Those big LPs and the photos, the art, everything. I remember just the cover of Tapestry, the mood of that really appealed to me, and I loved it. And that James Taylor, Sweet Baby James photo that Henry Diltz took just meant so much to me. These people were heroic, but that music was just so beautiful, too. So to talk to Peter Asher and realize how much he put together and, your mother played on Sweet Baby James and, how they worked together and inspired each other, it's fascinating.
It truly is fascinating the way it's all put together. And what I finally realized after talking to Lou Adler, Danny Kortchmar himself, my mother, Peter Asher, is just how much Danny Kortchmar is responsible for so many careers.
Yeah.
He had this connecting role. He was responsible for so much. He gave James Taylor Peter's phone number. And as Peter said, he didn't know that Peter had a new job at Apple. He just said, hey, my band opened for Peter and Gordon, and he's a cool cat. He's a good guy. You're in good hands with him. Make sure when you go to London, you call him up.
Yeah.
And just this guy comes over, James, plays him these songs, plays him some songs in his front room, and that he acted on that, and it changed so many destinies. That one phone hookup created a new career for James, a new career for Peter. Peter then became a manager and eventually found Linda Ronstadt. Peter was responsible for putting my mother into James Taylor's band as a piano player, putting the section together. I mean, it's probably more careers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable. He's one of those guys, and I found Van Dyke Parks is that way too, that he played important parts connecting people. He didn't do a lot, but just enough that those connections were made. And it's kind of phenomenal that, yeah, go see my friend Peter. He just happens to get a new job, not for any record company, but for Apple. This was the Beatles' own label that they started. And I thought James Taylor was the first non-British signing, but Peter said, I think he was the first signing of all. And Peter became head of A&R, but as he told us here, he didn't sign hardly anyone else. He said it was a nightmare. They got a lot of tapes, but they didn't hear much else. But I think that's one of the things about him, too, that he recognized it. I mean, as I said in the interview, this was before Fire and Rain. And he goes, of course, because he produced Fire and Rain. But my point was, he saw what James Taylor was going to be. And I think he was being overly humble when he said, it's easy to be a manager. You just get a great client. But he didn't get James Taylor after he was a superstar. He saw that he was going to be famous. And some managers just didn't really see the potential.
You know, it wasn't just, oh, this guy's an amazing singer. This guy's an amazing singer, and I'm going to bet my life on it. I'm going to move to America. I'm going to change my job.
Yeah, that was the thing I didn't quite realize either. But Apple was starting to fall apart for various reasons. The Beatles were fighting. And Peter saw James Taylor, and he left Apple Records to go to America, where we are now, and make his next albums. And that was a good move. That Peter left Apple Records working for the Beatles, though it was falling apart. I'm sure he could see that happening. But to come to America, because he knew how important it was to work with James Taylor. And then they just did a remarkable album, Sweet Baby James. But Peter produced his first album, James Taylor, for Apple. I believe it was just called James Taylor. And I loved that album. It was so beautiful because it had all these musical interludes, orchestral interludes between each song. And this was, not too long after Sgt. Pepper. To me, that was just great. I couldn't, people, like he was saying that he thought it was overproduced, and other people have said that. At the time, I didn't take it like that. I just thought, wow, it's so beautiful because, like you said, the voice was there, and those songs, Carolina on My Mind, which Paul McCartney played bass on. So I love that album, but it says a lot about Peter Asher that he grew up with huge success. Paul McCartney dating his sister, so he saw people could be great artists but have huge success commercially too. He considers that album a failure, but artistically, I don't think it would be a failure. So many millions of people, our lives have been changed by those records. I mean, to me, even if he was an amazing singer, he wrote Fire and Rain. That alone is one of those miracle songs, like You've Got a Friend or many that your mom wrote. And it was interesting because Peter Asher obviously heard it before it was recorded. And I always like to know, like, when you first heard that song, which I consider a standard, what'd you think? And being Peter Asher, he goes, yeah, I thought it was great. I did not think it was a single. That was the first thing he thought. Not, what an amazing song. The poetry, the music. He said, I thought Carolina was the single. And it shows, he's a wise producer. He's really thinking, yeah, it's a good song, but is it going to be a hit? And, that's who he was, and that's the business we're in.
It's an interesting thing because we're doing all these interviews with people, and some of them have been making music for a very long time, and we're talking about a part of history that's 30, 40, 50 years old in some of these interviews. We actually have an interview with Sonny West coming up, who wrote Rave On, and we're talking even longer ago. But I want to make
Mike Stoller, too.
Yeah,
more
Mike
than 50.
Stoller, too. I want to make a distinction here for our listeners. If you think that, okay, we're just interviewing people who are not contemporary. Here's my view of that. I am focusing on all of these interviews when I'm talking to any of our interviewees about the times when they were young, what decisions they were making. I want to know what it was like to be in their shoes at age of 19 or 21 or 25 when they were doing these things. What opportunities were coming their way? What were they thinking? That interests me. It interests me more than, okay, let's do a tribute to these 50-year-old songs and let's just keep playing the old songs, because I'm interested in how we take that learning, how we take the information of what they did to apply it today in the creation of new great music, new standards. Let's write some new standards today.
Absolutely.
So I don't look at this as we're just looking back, because I am not a looking back person. I'm progressive, and I'm all about what you can create in the moment. There's lessons here. when you have someone sitting on a street corner and they're busking a Bob Dylan song, and, you've heard that song a million times busked by a bunch of people. Sometimes I think what that person is missing is you too can write a song like that. It's the belief that these old classics are all there is that stops people from getting inside those songs and thinking, what is the frame of mind that one has to have to be open to creating something like this, or let something like this pass through me? Mm-hmm. The belief that they're huge and I'm just a nobody, or I can't do it, will prevent a great song from coming into being.
My hope is that people, and I've gotten this comment often, that people go, wow, I didn't know great songwriters had to struggle with it as much as they do, like I do. I thought Carole King or James Taylor, it's just pure genius. And they realize, no, this is something everyone works at. And it emphasizes, too, that, like your mom said, and all these people, they spent years to develop that artistry. It's not something that comes out of nowhere. And it emphasizes that it's a serious art and craft. But I also want to honor songwriting in general. And if you wrote a song that people care about 50 years or even remember, that's important. That songs are that important. Sometimes I think people forget that, humans wrote these. They didn't come out of nowhere. Someone made this happen and then made the record. So I never mean to, demean, current stuff. And in fact, I thought it was really cool that Peter Asher, unlike other people we've spoken to recently, was pretty positive about today's music scene. He thought Ed Sheeran is as great as anyone and talked about him and some other people. And he seemed very up on today's music and said the songwriting's changed, but he loved the records and the sound. So I liked his attitude about it.
What I do love about hearing all of these interviews, for example, Peter said when he was working with James, their goal was not to sell out arenas. They thought it would be great. It would be a huge accomplishment if they could get to a point where he could fill up clubs like the Troubadour all across America.
Right.
That was their goal. So that's another educating thing, which is things that become really big and end up being in arenas are not necessarily started off with that goal in mind. That isn't the goal. As my mother said, you can have that in your mind, but don't do it for that because it may never happen. And if it doesn't, you're not a failure.
Right. And it's really important that she said that. And other people have said that to me. Like John Prine said, when he was a mailman, when he could quit that and just make a living playing in a club in Chicago, that was enough. He never thought beyond that. That was enough. But as Peter said, with James Taylor, suddenly he's on the cover of Time magazine. He became a cultural icon.
Well, so let's get to the interview. Peter talks a lot about how much he credits his clients, James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt, for the success of both of their careers.
Your career is so remarkable in so many ways that you covered so many bases. I mean, starting as a musician, A&R, manager, and everything else. But and you performed as a child. I know you acted. Mm-hmm. But was music at the beginning when you were a kid? Was that the main idea for you, that you wanted to make music yourself?
As a career, no, I wasn't particularly thinking that. I always loved music. I mean, I grew up in a very musical household.
Indeed.
My mother was a classical musician, and my father was an amateur pianist as well as being a doctor. So, and a big fan of Gilbert and Sullivan and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, I grew up with lots of music there, but I didn't contemplate it as a career until it just kind of happened.
Speaking of your mother, if I got it right, she played oboe.
Yes.
And taught at the Guildhall.
Well, actually, she taught mostly at the Royal Academy of Music. She was senior oboe professor at the Royal Academy, but she also was a visiting professor at the Guildhall. And the reason the Guildhall comes up is that is indeed where she taught George Martin the oboe.
Oh, she taught him oboe. I know she was his teacher, but oboe is what she taught him?
That's what she played,
I didn't realize
and taught. Yeah, that's what she teaches and plays.
Did you know him at all before the Beatles, George, yourself? Yeah.
No. I mean, in other words, when my mother met him again, when he was my mother's daughter's boyfriend's record producer, she knew him from being a pupil of hers. That was the two encounters.
But he was producing records, obviously, before.
Yes, although of course the reason the Beatles thought so highly of George Martin initially was nothing to do with music. It was that he'd produced comedy albums they loved.
Yeah, the Goons they loved, right?
Yes, he didn't actually produce The Goon Show.
Oh.
They loved The Goons, but The Goon Show was a radio show produced by the BBC. But the individual Goons made some records, which he did. He did Peter Sellers' big successful album, Songs for Swinging Sellers, that was a masterpiece. George did that. And he did some stuff with Spike Milligan as well. But somehow, because of that, people sometimes encapsulate that as, oh, he produced The Goons. No, he didn't. The Goons was a radio show, The Goon Show, which, of course, was not produced by a record producer, but by the BBC.
I see. Yeah, so much of that information gets a little mixed up at times.
Yes, yeah.
So you were doing music, you're performing as a musician. What stage did you think I could be an A&R man?
I wanted to be a producer the moment I was in the studio. The first day I was ever in a real studio, which was Gordon and my first session in 1964. Once I understood what a record producer did, I knew that was something I would like to do. The fact that you could hire musicians much better than yourself and tell them what to do, and I thought that was brilliant. And I was fascinated with the technology of it, with the arranging aspects of it, with the song choosing aspects of it. So becoming a record producer was kind of a conscious plan on my part. Much of my career was not a conscious plan. But, for example, becoming a manager was never an ambition of mine. But becoming a producer was.
Was being a manager the desire to protect the artists? And
Yes,
the records
being
that you
a
carry?
manager was a consequence of finding James. We found each other, and we didn't know anybody else we trusted to do it. So we agreed that I would become James's manager on the kind of how hard could it be basis. And I mean, look, people often ask me, what does it take to be a great manager? And the answer is pathetically simple and rather annoying, which is a great client. In other words, I inducted the first two managers ever into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which they asked me to come do. Not surprisingly, those two managers were Brian Epstein, the Beatles, Andrew Loog Oldham, the Rolling Stones. So how to be a great manager is all too clear.
Yes.
So
However,
I was a good manager because I lucked out. And then, yes, I mean, there are certain qualities you need to be a good manager that Brian Epstein had, which was that he was an honest guy. He thought the Beatles were brilliant. He understood how good they were. And he wanted to do the best he could for them, which is exactly how I felt about James. So, yes, there are plenty of ways to be a bad manager, but
yes.
being a good manager is relatively straightforward. And being a great manager depends on having an incredibly good client. And Brian Epstein lucked out with the Beatles, and I lucked out with James.
But there have been instances where people had great clients, like Elvis Presley, for example, who
And
made
totally screwed it up.
bad
Yeah,
decisions.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Whereas
same. That's what I said. There's plenty of ways you could be a bad manager.
It seemed he didn't understand what Elvis could be. He didn't see that, whereas you
I
seem
don't
to
think
clearly
he
understand.
cared. Yeah.
Oh, well, that
Yeah.
could be too.
I guess you can't be a good manager with a not good client.
You can do your best, but you'll
Yeah.
never go down in history as a great manager if you're managing somebody lame. And,
Yeah.
Whereas he seemed to misjudge that rock and roll was going to be around. You saw James Taylor early on, before Fire and Rain, before Sweet Baby James, and you knew this guy mattered.
Well, I
You
did all
could see
those.
it.
That's right. Certainly before all those. Yeah, 'cause
Yes.
I did all those. But yes, no. First time I heard him in my flat in London.
Was there a Danny Kortchmar connection there?
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah, as you probably know all this, but I mean, Kootch had played with Peter and Gordon for a year, I think, in this band, the King Bees, who backed Peter and Gordon on a couple of U.S. tours. And in addition to loving his playing, which I did, he was a Steve Cropper devotee, and we loved the same licks. But he also was a great guy. I mean, he and I became great friends and stayed in touch. But, back in those days, that meant actually writing letters occasionally. And I would see him, I'd stay with him and his then wife when I was in LA. And so when he and James ended up in a band together, because of course they'd known each other since they were 12 or 11 or whatever it was. That was me.
Yeah.
So James then ended up in this band, Flying Machine, which was in New York and was suffering every vicissitude New York can offer, which, so they were broke. They had a record label that made half an album and then disappeared. They didn't like their managers. The band broke up. Several of them were strung out, including James. So it was a miserable situation. James decided to go to London, and Danny gave him my phone number, basically just saying, I've got a friend in London. If you're going to be there, you should call him. Danny didn't even know at the time that I'd got a new job. But by the time James just phoned me up and said, I'm Kootch's friend, and I said, come over. He played me this tape, and, I went crazy.
What was on that tape?
Something's Wrong, Something in the Way She Moves, Knocking Around the Zoo. Can't remember what else, maybe a couple more. And then he played a couple live. I picked up my guitar and played a couple live. And I told him how good I thought he was. And also said, oddly enough, I've got this new job as head of A&R for this brand new record label that the Beatles have started called Apple. And so I can sign people. And it was kind of like, would you like a record deal? And he said, yes, please. And that was the essence of the conversation.
That was a good hookup.
Yeah.
Kootch made.
He came to you not knowing even that you were with Apple. Just
I don't think so. I don't think he knew. He might have found out in the interim, but I mean, Kootch didn't give him my phone number saying, I know the head of A&R for Apple. He just said, this is my friend Peter. I was on the road with him. He's okay. So that was the basis of it. At what point he discovered I also had a job as running a record label, I don't know.
A good job for a special label.
Yes,
Apple.
Exactly.
But is it true that he was the first non-English signing to Apple?
Yeah, he might have been the first signing altogether, I think. I'm not sure who was first. Maybe Mary
Hopkin, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember
same time.
going to Wales to sign Mary Hopkin. I don't remember the exact chronology of it, but it was around the same time.
And you produced that first beautiful Apple album, correct?
I did.
You worked on that. That's such a beautiful album. It was so artistic, with the musical interludes between each song.
Yes.
It was gorgeous.
That was a guy called Richard Hewson, who had never done a pop arrangement of any kind before. He was a classical student at the Guildhall, actually, coincidentally. And I knew him because he was a jazz trumpet player, and I was in a band with him. So I wanted... It's funny because Richard, like a lot of the stories get muddled up. Richard actually has it a little bit wrong, because I read an interview with Richard Hewson. He said, I think Peter used me because he didn't really know any arrangers. But in fact, that's clearly not true, because if you look at the Peter and Gordon records, they have arranging credits on them. Arranged by Jeff Love, arranged by various pop arrangers. So logical thing to do would have been call one of them. It was in a particular desire to make it more classical and less pop that I called somebody I knew didn't do pop arrangements, and that was Richard Hewson. And that's how he ended up involved with Apple. And then I recommended him to Paul, who used him on the Mary Hopkin record, Those Were the Days, and so on. And he ended up working with the Beatles quite a bit.
That first Apple album for James was so beautiful artistically, and Paul
Thank you.
McCartney
I mean, I
played
still
on it.
think, to be honest, I think it's a bit overproduced. I think I went a bit too far with all that stuff. But it was my determination to make people notice. I didn't want them to go, oh, it's another, folk singer, acoustic guitar, long hair. I wanted to make it something different. That's why the next album, when we made the first American album, obviously I went in a very different direction and just made up a core band of
different sound.
3 people essentially, because we used different bass players. I hadn't found Lee Sklar at that point. People always think he's on that record because he was on the tour. I'd used 3 different bass players, different ones on different tracks. But the core band, was, of course, Danny Kortchmar, who we knew we wanted to use. We loved his playing. I found Russ Kunkel, who'd never done a session before in the studio.
Really? Wow.
I found him at a rehearsal by this guy, John Stewart. You remember John Stewart?
Of course, from John well.
From, ex-Kingston Trio, that John Stewart.
Yes.
And the songwriter.
Daydream Believer, he wrote.
Yes, he did. I'm not sure John ever quite forgave me as he started stealing his drummer, which was pretty true, actually, because Russ was going on the road with John, and I hired him to play on James's album. And then, as you probably know, the third member of that trio was a piano player. Because that one was because, I'd been a Carole King fan in the abstract since I first heard, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? And onwards and all the songs. So I knew very much who she was. And then by the time I got to LA, I'd heard her demos of those songs, which I guess it must have been sort of like bootlegs at the time, because somebody said, oh, you want to hear these demos? And it was Carol doing those songs we all knew.
Right, the demos were famously covered.
Around, exactly. So I heard the demos, and that's when I went, I really like that piano playing, quite apart from all the great songs. And so when I got here, of course, it was Kootch again who introduced me to Carol, because I guess he was already in the city, or I forget the chronology of it all. But he introduced me to Carol, and that's when I said, I know this, you're a super big deal songwriter, but, after I'd done my whole fanboy groveling, which I did, which I meant every word of it, I said, I wondered if you'd come play piano with this guy. And she didn't know who James was at that point. But I've got this video of Carol talking about it, which you've probably seen, but she came over to my house to meet James. And they sat down together and played together for the very first time.
Oh, so you brought them together.
Yeah.
Me and
you
Kootch.
probably knew that.
It was me and Kootch.
brought that up. Yeah,
it was Kootch and me collectively, because he'd introduced me to Carol. And then Carol talks about, there's a clip of Carol saying, quite recently, I don't know what it was for, some interview and stuff, but she came over to my house. There was James, who said hi to Kootch, said hi to me, and then I then said, why don't you just sit down and play together? And they did.
And that became, and you put that whole group together, which
Yes.
became one of the great recording groups on so many albums.
Yes,
obviously.
and then Lee Scott joined after the album was done, which is the mistake people often make. They think logically he must have been on that record, but I used 3 different bass players on the record.
What bass players did you use?
Yeah, I was wondering.
Randy Meisner on a couple. A guy called John London, I can't quite remember where he came from, but he was good on a couple. And then famously on Fire and Rain, we wanted, James wanted, this was his idea. Though I think he did some interview where he gave me credit for it. Everything gets muddled up, but it was definitely his idea. He wanted to put upright bass, bowed bass on Fire and Rain. And so I asked the studio, Sunset Sound, and the engineer, Bill Lazarus, who was the best session upright bass player in town. And they recommended this guy, Bobby West. They said, Bobby Wild West. I went, sold.
Yeah.
That clinches it.
And you did get.
And this guy arrived, tall black guy, very imposing, carrying the bass case that has written on it, Bobby quotes Wild West. We've so much made the right decision.
Sold, yeah.
And he played great. And that's all that the big droning. People think there's cellos on it. It's not. It's just a bass. And then I doubled it so that it's like slightly flangey and stuff. But that was James's idea. So da 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 is all an octave lower than I'm singing it. That's Bobby Wild West on the bass. And so he was on Fire and Rain. And then James actually also found Leland a couple of months later, I guess, because the record was finished. And I think it was coming out. And James had heard this band called Wolfgang and called me up and said, I found this incredible bass player. And that was Lee.
And my understanding of what James has said is that his bass parts are pretty much determined by his writing, but the bass parts are in his guitar parts. So what is that?
He
accurate?
writes, well, the guitar, yes, to some extent, but not what Lee played, no.
Ah.
Lee's all over the place. But James's thumb, the way he finger picks and writes, is always it's sort of a bass part, sort of like a figured bass, like in classical music. It's almost, it's like the left hand of a piano, James's thumb. But it's the bass part, certainly that Lee would play, would go substantially beyond that.
Yeah.
He's by no means just copying James's thumb. He has to accommodate James's thumb for sure.
I see.
We, at the Village at ASCAP, we were telling the various stories of You've Got a Friend when it was being recorded.
Yeah.
So was the story tell me the story again of how that came to be. Was it A&amp Records that my mother recorded her album with it?
Well, yes, but the first thing was, how we heard the song. My recollection, and I think this is right, but it'd be interesting to see if Carol confirms the same story. But she played it at a sound check at the Troubadour. This was when James was playing the Troubadour for the second, possibly third, but at least second time. Because up till then, he'd been on his own. Solo, acoustic guitar, half a house at the Troubadour. Then after Sweet Baby James started to do really well, we owed the Troubadour another week. We came back, and I wanted to put together the exact band who played on the record. So hired Russ, hired Lee, asked Carol if she would do it, and she said she would. And there was James then who had the idea of her opening the show. She'd never, the best of my knowledge, done live performances before that. And I don't know if the city ever did anything, I don't know, but don't think so. And so James said, look, no one's going to know who you are. You'll just be this little girl, which is what she looked like at the time, playing piano, behind me. Why don't you do like a little opening set and play some of the songs you wrote? If you tell people you wrote them, it'll blow their minds, which it did. And so she was very nervous about that. She was quite frightened. And it was at on the opening night, we'd done our sound check. Then Carol was doing her sound check alone on stage. And James and I were sitting in the balcony just to make sure everything was okay. Because Carol, as I say, was pretty, stage frightened.
Yeah.
And it was for her sound check that she played the song she just finished writing You've Got a Friend. And that's when James and I looked at each other and kind of went, shit, that's one of the best songs we've ever heard in our lives. James described it as the best pop song, one of the best pop songs ever written. And that he asked if he could learn it. And I think it felt to me, my recollection is that it was me asking Carol a few days later, I said, James's version is coming out really well. He's put in all the little Jamesisms and, it sounds cool. And would it be crazy to ask if we might be able to record it? Because I knew that she was about to make the album that became Tapestry. And I figured, but Carol, with amazing grace, said, no, I'd be honored to have James learn it and record it. So, which of course is against all the rules of pop music. If you write a hit song, you do not give it away to another artist just before you start your album, but, because you want to keep it for yourself. But, so what happened was that, that's how it happened. That within, I think it was in just a week or two of each other. It might have been longer. Somebody must have the dates somewhere in some nerdy piece of research.
That would be me, I think.
We were at Crystal Sound on Vine Street, and we recorded our version of You've Got a Friend with Carol playing on it, and the James version, which I produced, and the other secret weapon we had, James's girlfriend at the time, Joni Mitchell, was in the studio, so I asked her to sing the background parts, or James did, which sounded great. So on You've Got a Friend, all those backgrounds is Joni.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Wow.
And very almost simultaneously, Carol was at A&amp with Lou Adler, and some of the same musicians, I guess. I don't remember how many of them doing her version of You've Got a Friend. And the miracle is, of course, it was paid off all around, because we had the hit single, but Carol had one of the biggest albums of all time in Tapestry. So it worked out for everybody.
You're right. It does break rules, but Carole King generally broke rules, and that she just wasn't
Well,
like
indeed.
everyone
I mean,
else.
she was just being really nice, and she liked James.
But I think
they're huge mutual fans.
I think she was a hit songwriter first, as you well know. I think she got more joy out of that than doing the song herself. That James Taylor, she said to us the two greatest joys were that James doing that song and Aretha Franklin doing Natural Woman.
Of course. Yeah.
I think as a songwriter, it was more important.
Yeah, no, I think that, the reason Carol said yes was, first, she's nice, it's a friendly, cool thing to do, and she liked James. But yes, thinking as a writer, that's
Songwriter first.
Songwriter first.
At that point, particularly.
And who would be a better singer? As we were saying, Louise and I, he has such a friendly voice. When he sings, it's like a friend.
No, I remember Carol crying when she heard our record finished.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So she wasn't there at all when you recorded
She
that.
played on it. She's playing on it. But I mean, that was the track, and then she went away. But then I finished James's vocal, mixed it, put the Joni on, all that stuff, and she came back and listened to it.
Yeah, I think she was channeling James. She said in the interview we did with her that when she wrote that song, she was thinking of James, not in terms of him singing the song ever, but she said she'd been playing his music and listening to his albums. And,
Interesting.
And she felt that she was just, immersed, marinating in James. So she felt like it was that energy that went into it.
And that's what was interesting, of course, about that Troubadour show, was that, which we recreated as close as we could for the PBS thing, was that we were doing songs from the Apple album and from Sweet Baby James. And then we were doing songs from Mudslide Slim, which we hadn't cut yet, but that was what You've Got a Friend ended up on. Whereas Carol was doing songs which were going to be on Tapestry, but hadn't been cut yet. So in other words, we were an album ahead of her, you know what I mean? In other words, You've Got a Friend was on our second successful album, and on Carol's first successful album.
Right. I got to say, Mudslide Slim was such a great album. We just loved
Thanks.
that.
Yeah.
It doesn't get the acclaim of Sweet Baby James, obviously, but all of those albums were just so great. And I know it's obvious that Carole King is a great piano player, but it was when you recreated the Troubadour at the Troubadour, the first part of that, and she was playing with him, that I realized how great she was, that she matched his guitar playing.
Right.
More than a piano player.
She's not, she's not a great piano player in the sense that there's people who can outplay her, but the point is she doesn't do that, and that's not what we wanted. To me, what was great, what was brilliant, amazing about her piano playing is that it's songwriter piano playing, which is what, it's almost like what James would play if he could play the piano. you know,
Yeah.
which he can a bit, but not like Carol. So Carol's a really good piano player, but who never gets flashy or puts in extra notes or does any of that stuff because she's thinking about the song, and that's what James's songs do.
And she was so in sync
So
with
she
his-
was the perfect piano player.
Yes.
But so whereas say someone like say Don Grolnick is a great piano player, was a great piano player in every sense of the word, but he would have to deliberately back off and re-listen to what Carol had done to figure out how you played a James Taylor song without making it go complicated and jazzy, you know.
And it
So-
came naturally and intuitively to her.
Carol.
She was so in sync with his finger picking. It's
Exactly.
right on it,
Yeah.
unlike a normal piano player.
Yeah.
It was
It
remarkable.
was a great chemistry.
Quite
Exactly.
talented, that girl. Okay.
Yeah, so just jumping around a bit, so how'd you meet Linda and how did that come together?
I was in New York and somebody said you should go and see this girl at the bitter end. She's got an amazing voice. She's an extraordinary singer. You know, she sings barefoot in these really short shorts and she's super hot. So if I'm allowed to say that these days. And it was all true.
Yeah.
You know, every word of it was true. So and I met her and then she turns out, not in addition to all that, being incredibly smart and brilliant and intellectually astounding. And so we hit it off, and I was a big fan. And I didn't start managing her straight away because, at the time I just started managing Kate Taylor, and it seemed like that might be a bit of a conflict. But then Kate decided she didn't want to be in the music business at that particular point. So eventually, Linda and I got together. I think I began helping her as a producer finish the album Don't Cry Now that she was in the middle of, which she'd been working on with several different producers, and it was all in a bit of a muddle. So I tried to kind of sort that one out. And then we did indeed begin a management relationship. And then the next album was the one I produced from scratch, and that turned into Heart Like a Wheel.
She did a lot of covers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we always have. Yeah.
She's not a songwriter.
Yeah.
She's written a couple of songs in her life. Yeah. She could have written more, I'm convinced, but she's so good at finding songwriters and choosing songs. You know, I mean, I wouldn't have met John David Souther. I might not even have met Jackson. I wouldn't have met Warren, maybe. I wouldn't
Warren
have
Zevon.
met Warren Zevon or Eric Kaz, you know, the McGarrigles. I mean, most of these are amazing songwriters to whom Linda introduced me.
So Linda found Warren Zevon, and that's how you got with Warren?
I think Jackson might have found him first.
Yeah, Jackson really
I don't know
championed
that research, but I think Linda may have told me about him, but it might have come from Jackson in the first place.
Because by
She
doing
told me
his
about
songs.
McGarrigles and so on. And so she's just always had a great Judy Still. You know, she's had an ear for songs. She would come and say, listen to this, and, you know, tell me about songs and people. She was good at that.
And as you know,
Is
by
good, still
by
good.
her doing all those Warren Zevon songs, it changed his career, you know,
Yep.
enormously, profoundly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, exactly. And the McGarrigles and a lot of other people.
Yeah.
A lot of Heart Like a Wheel became a big deal song, you know, because of Linda.
And I remember you were managing Zevon as well.
Yeah.
And he's one of those
Later
guys
on.
that seemed just like really a genius songwriter, but
Yes.
maybe never got the acclaim he really deserved because everything he did, I find, is just brilliant.
Yeah, he's brilliant. But he's one of those songwriters where his own version of the songs are great, but they don't sound really commercial. A bit like Randy Newman, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who writes brilliant songs, but the way he sings them is we love. But you know, with the exception of Short People and I Love LA, which was sort of a little bit novelty-ish,
Yeah.
the songs don't get the respect they deserve.
Yeah.
Because of the way he sings them, and then of course other people have made them into hits, and then people don't even realize they're a Randy Newman song. But
Right. And like Zevon had Werewolves of
same
London,
thing.
that was his big hit. It was like a novelty song too.
yeah,
somewhere,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Whereas you know, to us, there's a million Warren Zevon hits.
Yes.
But yeah, the hits were when Linda did them. You know, she did Poor Pitiful Me.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was like he was a hit songwriter.
And yet it's such a different song when Linda Ronstadt sings Poor
Yeah.
Pitiful Me. When he's singing it, it's like sarcasm. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The records were all amazingly put together in terms of song choice. Every song had a role on
Yeah.
all her records. Really well chosen.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, I would be given too much credit for that. I mean, I chose some of them, suggested some of them, or chose some of them, but Linda chose a lot of them too. I think back then there was an assumption, you know, that I was Svengali kind of, you know, thing, that I was constructing these records out of thin air. Not at all. Linda, as you know, has very strong views of her own and is entirely capable of choosing her own songs. So it was a collaboration.
That's wonderful. So you're performing now again with doing the Peter and Jeremy.
Sometimes I do that, and I also do my own show.
Yeah.
Which I did the other day at the Grammy Museum.
Are you enjoying that?
Yeah, it's fun. Yes, it's nice because people seem to like it, and they, playing these small places, you get to actually talk to the audience and meet people and stuff. It's fun.
Well, I got to say, I grew up, I'm a little older than Louis, so I remember, World Without Love. That was a huge hit. I was number one all over the world.
Yeah.
And we had the 45. But to us, that just represented, as did the Beatles, obviously, Herman's Hermits, just that British sound.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it again. It's those vocals you guys sing. It's just so beautiful, your vocal sound, that harmony. To us, it was all part of
yeah, I mean, it was. You see, it was part of. I talk about this extensively, but the weirdest part about it was all based on your music and not ours. I mean, the whole British invasion consisted of us, falling in love with your music, tweaking it a bit, and selling it back to
tweaking
you.
it quite well, I'd say.
Well, but you know what I mean. I mean, you got to remember the Beatles themselves, but they were a tribute band. Not to a particular band, but to American music. Until they started writing songs, they didn't sing one English song.
Huh.
If you think about it, it was all American. We all looked to see who wrote all these amazing songs, and it was all Lieber and Stoller or Goffin and King, or it was Man and Wild.
Right.
And I talk in my show about we didn't know who those people were.
Yeah.
There was a mysterious Mr. King, we assumed, who wrote all these great songs.
Mr. King.
And
worked with Mr. Goffin.
And exactly. And, if it was Lieber and Stoller and Goffin and King, we figured it's all these pairs of guys.
Right.
And we just were in love with all that music. And that's where it all came from. We wanted to be the Everly Brothers.
Yeah.
And the funny part is, we changed it a bit, not consciously. I mean, we were really trying to sing like the Everly Brothers, but our voices were different, and it came out different. And then it bounced back and changed American music. I mean, I had a conversation with David Crosby.
Yes.
When we were talking about the Everlys and how much we both loved them. I said, well, you knew when you and Chris Tillman started singing together, I'm sure you were trying to sound like the Everlys as well. And he went, no, actually, we were trying to sound like you guys. And I went, really? Really? He said, yeah. Everybody then wanted to sound like these English bands who were taking over. So we were trying to be the Everlys.
Yes.
And they were listening to a Peter and Gordon record going, we should sound kind of like that. So I said, you actually telling me that I can take a tiny, tiny bit of credit for the way the Byrds sounded? He went, yep. I went,
I'll take it.
Absolutely.
sold. It's kind of amazing, but it was a back and forth.
It's remarkable to me to listen to World Without Love, which Paul McCartney wrote. And I didn't realize that, if I got this right, that was a song he wrote for the Beatles that John didn't think was good enough for the Beatles.
He wrote it. He just wrote it. But yes, he suggested it to John, and John didn't want to do it. So
why not? Do you know why not? Because that's pretty amazingly great.
Well,
song.
apparently, I mean, John really just didn't like it. I don't know why. Maybe he thought it was too wimpy or whatever. But there was a point where there's actually on record is that Paul would try and sing it to John to sell the song, and the first line is "Please lock me away," and John would go, "Okay, I will. The song's over." So it was an unfinished orphan song.
Yeah, it was just amazing to me it's a song written at a sophisticated level, 1964, but those chords are McCartney that to John Lennon not quite good enough.
Right. So it had no bridge or anything, when we heard it. In my show, I played the original demo that Paul made.
Yeah, and I listened to that today. And also, if I got it right, you said that you told Paul, well, I want to do it, go write the bridge, and he did it very quickly. Is that right? Quickly.
That's true, yeah.
And even then, I mean, as a songwriting nerd admitted, he wrote it in E major, and he goes to the minor 4. It goes to an A minor, which is more like
for the bridge, yeah.
Yeah, and in the verse too. It's more like Cole Porter really than Chuck Berry to do that.
Yeah, but the bridge is the main A minor part,
Right. But
So
which he does, and I want to hold your hand. But to go to
Yeah.
a minor 4, that's not like rock and roll. That's more like writing a standard kind of thing.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Peter, you're involved a lot with the Grammys, and
Yes.
it's so you see a lot of new acts coming in. What do you make of like all these great stories you're telling? They're all of a time when people were places in person in studios. They did shows, which still happens today. But there's this whole other dimension where we're really, really spread out and we're really online. So what do you see as the way that, let's say you have kids who are super talented like James and my mother were, and how are they going to find their new groups and their new sounds and have these things in this climate?
Oh, they do. I mean, everyone's sending files back and forth and playing each other's stuff, and I mean, there's so many great singers and great writers and great producers out there now. I mean, I think it's entirely different, and the methodology is different. The accessibility is massive. I mean, it used to be if you didn't have a record deal, no one was ever going to hear your music. Now it's one of a million routes. So everyone's making music. And it's easy to get your music out in front of people, which is good. But of course, the bad thing is, and equally easy for everyone else,
Right.
So
the competition is fierce.
Massive, So how many tunes get uploaded to iTunes and YouTube and all these places every single day, compared to how many records used to get released is crazy. And yeah, but I think that people send each other files and what do you think of this and add this and change that, and it's great stuff comes out of it.
Going a different way.
Some brilliant people out there. Some
There are.
amazing singers out there.
I know, it's almost like they heard all the records and then they just came out singing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And the people who make records a lot of different ways, but there's still, to me, someone like Ed Sheeran is right up there on the same level as James and Carol. Somebody who just plays their instrument, sings great songs, and writes amazing songs.
Wasn't he busking for a really long time? I mean, I
before
think
he made a record,
Yeah.
he'd done like 2,000 gigs or something.
right, so that has something to do with it.
It has
The
a lot
actual-
to
You
do
betcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He and I become very good friends.
Ah.
And
Oh, that's interesting, because I was wondering if you thought there were other people nowadays that are at that level. I mean,
when I first heard Ed, I was in London, before he made it over here, when it was just starting to happen in London, heard that song A-Team and said, who is this? I have to meet this guy. And I did. And we've actually worked together a bit and become friends.
Because you were there, like when James Taylor came up with Fire and Rain, which to
Yes.
me is a standard.
Yes.
But do you hear songs at that level very much? It seems there's great records being made, but I don't know if there's songs at that level being written too often. Besides Ed.
Besides Ed.
Shape of You is quite great, I think.
Shape of You is great, but I mean, going back to that very first song, A-Team, about the crack addict, it's breathtaking. The first line, breathing in snowflakes, and you're going to go, what's this song about? It's beautiful. And then you gradually realize,
Yes.
a face crumbling like pastry. I mean, that's good stuff.
Yeah,
It's the real thing.
Pretty amazing.
And that was when he was 20.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing him play at a Beatles Grammy show.
Yeah.
And he was the only one who didn't have a band, and he comes
Yeah,
out and
That's right, I was there.
he was just, killing it with just
Yeah.
a guitar and
Yeah.
a vocal line.
That's right.
And now it's crazy, because the good thing is that works. I mean, here's the guy who plays multiple nights in stadiums. His last tour was all stadiums, 3 nights at Wembley Stadium. That's 360,000 tickets, and and sold out. Crazy.
To jump back a
I'm a
little bit,
fan.
talking about
But there are a lot of good people.
You think so?
Alessia Cara is good. She's my favorite of the new girl singers. Brandy Clark is great. I mean, I like Casey Musgraves and Brandy Carlisle, but Brandy Clark to me is out of the new country women is extraordinary. And there's a lot of really good people.
So do you have hope for the art of songwriting? Some old timers
Oh
don't.
God, yes.
You
I
think
do.
it'll always
Yeah,
be?
now it is different now that hit singles have changed structurally so much.
Yeah.
Basically, is no bridge anymore. And the verse is the chorus. And part of the writing now is the production.
Yes.
No question. But the production is so great. Those arrangements are so cool,
Ah.
and the sounds are so terrific. I love it.
The ear candy factor is
Yeah.
exciting.
And totally different. I mean, especially this particular era, this last year, there's so much space in those records. Everything is quiet, and there's huge amounts of space. But and the vocal is just like here. I like that.
It was kind of remarkable to me that you did the first Apple album with James and then Sweet Baby James, which had such a organic, beautiful sound and different.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, like, the first time you heard the song Fire and Rain,
Yeah.
which is obviously a masterpiece to this day, did he play it for you solo? And do you
Yeah.
remember hearing it the first
Yes,
time?
yes. I do. I think it was in my flat in London. No, I loved the song. I didn't know it was going to be a hit, but I mean, I just thought it was an important song. Carolina, actually, was the one I would have bet on being a hit when I first heard that.
Yeah.
Because he was staying with me, but then he went away and he spent a week in Ibiza, which at that point was an uninhabited island, before all the dancing children and ecstasy had arrived in Ibiza. And that's when he wrote Carolina. And he explained that, he wrote it because he was feeling homesick, even though he didn't have a home. He said he'd made the discovery that you didn't have to have a home to be homesick, which is interesting.
That's a good point.
And he played me that song. Actually, that's the one I kind of went, that's a hit, which it never really quite was. Actually, it wasn't a big hit single. But to me, that's a more of an obvious, catchy chorus. You know, the da 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 da.
Classic song.
You know, I kind of went, there's a hit song. So
and if I'm right,
turns out Fire and Rain was the big hit, of course.
You got a great bass player on Carolina too. Didn't Paul McCartney play on that one?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he was good. He was good on bass.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the other Beatles sang on that.
No,
one? No.
It's widely reported that George Harrison sang on it. Not true.
Yeah, well, that's why we
But
the record
James
straight here.
himself has been known to perpetuate that myth because people told him George sang on it. So someone said on the Beatles radio, "Oh, is it true?" And he went, "Yeah." And I said to James when I saw him a few months ago, I said, "You know, by the way, George was not there. He did visit, but he didn't sing on the song." And James went, "Oh, okay." He said, "I don't remember anything."
Well, James also.
I've now corrected him, but
Yeah.
it's still going to be in the books forever. And it's a case in point where people go, no, he definitely did. And I said, honestly, look, 3 things. I was there. He didn't sing.
I would trust
Number
you.
2, if he had sung, I would have credited him because I'm very meticulous about credits. One of the things I've done from the beginning, back when there used to be no credits on records, Sweet Baby James, everyone was credited. I said on the Apple album, I credited everyone. If he'd sung, they said, no, you couldn't have done that contractually. And I go, but I credited Paul McCartney. You know, how could there be a rule that would apply to George and not to Paul? They go, oh. And then I said, and finally, you can't hear him. He's not there. You listen. The background vocals are me and James. And I can hear both of us. And they go, oh, I think he's
Speaking of George and James, I mean, George wrote something using James's opening line.
Yes.
Do you know, James wasn't sure. Did he hear mine? What happened there?
He had heard James's song.
Hear the demo? Or the,
Totally
no, he
different
had the
music.
record. What?
yeah, totally different, but the same opening line.
Let's put it this way. There was, actually at the Troubadour shows we recorded, there was one night when James said, you know, George Harrison really liked the song. In fact, he liked it so much he wrote it. I took that out. I said, we do not need to offend Olivia at this point in time.
Yeah.
But no, and James, when he's being charitable, he says, George may have liked that line. He said, but look at it this way. He said, the line I used in Something the Way She Moves is, I feel fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's
that's
perfect.
the generous explanation.
That is generous
But the truth
and
is,
true.
yeah, exactly.
A humble man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and speaking of Paul McCartney, I can't help but ask, but it's just remarkable to us Beatles fan, growing up, that he obviously dated your sister, Jane Asher, but he lived in your home for 2 full years. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's just so hard to, I understand, but he was a Beatle. But he wanted to be in your home more than be, being a Beatle.
Yeah, he was on the road some of the time, of course, but yes, he lived with us for 2 years. He and I shared the top floor.
Yes. And I think you said once the reason you thought he did is because he really wanted a regular, organized home, and your home was.
He liked that.
Pretty exciting.
It was very different than the way he'd grown up, and extremely different. The Beatles had a flat in London, the 4 of them, and it was chaos, of course, as you can imagine.
Near Apple?
Not particularly. It was in Green Street, Mayfair. But Apple
Baker Street.
started in Baker Street, then we were in Wigmore Street, then we were in Savile Row.
Where was the roof footage? Was that Baker
Savile
Street?
Row.
Oh, it was Savile Row.
Yeah. That was
Were
the
you
building
there when
there.
that was being
No.
built?
No, I'm widely reported as being there because there's a guy called Kevin something who works at the front desk who has red hair and is there. But I was not. I was in LA at the time. I was at an office at Capitol doing some kind of Apple business in LA. I can't remember exactly what I was up to, but I was here.
Who asked you to be A&R? How did you become A&R? Oh.
We'd had long conversations about what Apple was supposed to be. I would hang out a lot in his house in Cavendish Avenue. By this time, he'd moved out, and I was already starting to produce records, and Paul had actually played on the first record I ever produced, and he'd seen me work and stuff, and he asked me first if I produced some stuff for Apple, and then he said, in fact, why don't you be head of A&R for the label? I went, okay, cool.
That sounded like a job you wanted to take?
Yeah. Yeah, well, what's wrong? Brand new record label, and I wanted to produce records, so I knew that way I would get to do it.
Ah.
Got it.
So were you listening to a lot of artists looking for other people for Apple?
Oh, well, once I started the job, we had this thing where we solicit tapes from the public, it was a nightmare. And I had 4 people working for me sifting through all the shit we got, and we never got anything. Didn't
And then
sign,
James
did
walked
not
in the
sign.
door.
Then James went into the door at not at Apple, my house. It had nothing to do with Apple until I brought him in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we actually didn't sign one thing from all the tapes we got.
You know, in America, I knew Sweet Baby James first, that album, and then I discovered the Apple album, like most Americans, which I loved, and I didn't even realize it wasn't considered a success. I guess it didn't sell well.
No.
Why do you think that is? Was it not promoted well? Because it's such an amazing
It wasn't
album.
promoted very well. Apple was starting to fall apart. You know, that's when all the arguments were beginning, and Alan Klein arrived, and I resigned anyway. So, partly that, partly I just don't think we made. As I say, I think the record was a worthy effort, but I think all that the decoration that I did might have been a little over the top.
Not for us fans at the time. I just loved it. It was glorious.
You know, that's why I backed off so substantially on Sweet Baby James and made it very straightforward and simple, and put James and his guitar more clearly up front.
Which is what Lou did with my mother on Tapestry. It
Right.
is just the wisdom to see that the thing that I first heard and
Less
that
is
made
more.
me excited
Right.
is what's going to
Exactly.
excite the public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But hearing the Sweet Baby James, it seems like almost another producer. I loved that first album, but that was consciously because you felt at the time it was overproduced?
Yep.
Did James agree with that approach?
I think so. I mean, the way James describes it, he talks about us learning together how to produce, which I think he was right, because the Apple album was the first whole album I'd ever produced. I'd produced a few tracks before that. That was all. As I say, the first thing I ever did, Paul played on for me.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be sure to have a killer rhythm section for my first production. James didn't talk about it much. He doesn't talk about it a lot. You know, it's mostly left unsaid. Especially then, the guy was a silent junkie. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there was not a whole lot of direct communication. A lot of it was guesswork.
That must have been hard to constantly know that you had to keep him straight and
Well, I
safe.
learned. I mean, I didn't know much about it. I mean, I learned. I mean, that's a whole other subject that James talks about it sometimes now, but you know, I didn't really know what was going on. I was learning as I went along. You know, I thought he spent a lot of time in the bathroom. I really didn't know.
He does
So we
speak
made
about
the
it.
Apple record, and eventually I learned more about how that worked.
Did he show up? I mean, did he show up on time for
Yeah.
gigs and sound checks?
Yeah.
So he
Yeah,
hit it very well.
he did.
Yeah.
He did it very well.
Yeah, he does talk. I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
I just assumed playing with the Beatles, Apple, working with you was just great. And he said, actually, I was really sick. You know, I was dope sick at
Yeah,
the time.
exactly.
It was really hard
Right,
for him.
right.
We didn't understand that.
Yeah.
But we didn't understand a lot. I thought the Sweet Baby
And
James album...
he was a kind of a weird silent guy anyway. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, he's an intimidating silent. And I got on very well with him, but, you know, back then, James, we could be scary. You know what I mean? In the sense that, you know, not scary, but, you know, you'd meet this guy's tall, incredibly
Dark.
good looking, staring at his shoes and not saying much, and, you know.
Yeah, did you understand what a great writer he was, that
Yes.
he would continue to be that good?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, no, I had absolute confidence. I mean, I bet my career on his. Now, was I expecting the cover of Time magazine? No. But did I think that I mean, at that time, success to us was selling out the folk clubs. In other words, if we could sell out the Bitter End, the Main Point, the Celador, the Troubadour, you know, that circuit, that was success.
Mm-hmm.
When you said you're surprised Fire and Rain
And then
was...
the next thing you know, we're playing Madison Square Garden and on the cover of Time. That was more than we expected.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I didn't think Fire and Rain was a hit because when it became a hit, it changed music in a way that a song
Yeah.
that intimate could be a
Yes.
hit single.
Yes, it's unusual. It's just that it's that strong a song that it didn't have to follow the rules of what's normally a hit single.
Did you release another single before that?
I think Sweet Baby James,
Ah,
was a single first.
That's a waltz, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
often they say waltzes can't be number one.
There are some, but yeah,
People don't
very
waltz
few,
much anymore.
Not many.
Yeah, no.
I think it was probably because it was the title track. We were trying to establish who he was.
Mm-hmm.
Though, of course, James originally didn't want to call the album Sweet Baby James at all.
because people thought he was writing about himself.
He
correct?
said, you can't call the album Sweet Baby James because Sweet Baby James, of course, was Alex's kid.
His nephew.
And he said, no, they'll all think it's me, and I'll be called Sweet Baby James. And I kind of went, no. It's a great album title. Don't worry about all that. Won't happen. And of course, it did. I was lying. I was right. It was a brilliant album title, but he was completely right that everyone would start calling him Sweet Baby James. And And just like Madonna's stuck with Material Girl, James is stuck with Sweet Baby James, which is not as bad as being Material Girl. But,
Yeah.
you know, Madonna would get apparently quite upset about that. She was going,
Yeah.
why do they keep doing the Material Girl? Because it's a catchy title. You know, Sweet Baby James, same thing. And James has learned to live with it, I think.
That whole album, everything about it. The Henry Diltz is my friend who took that beautiful
Yeah,
cover.
yeah.
But growing up in Chicago, I assumed you guys did that in Massachusetts and the country.
Yeah, where was it? I don't remember.
It was in Burbank, where Oakwood is now.
Yeah.
There was a thing.
The weird thing is, the thing that confused me is the trucks. You know, because in that same session, there's pictures of me and James leaning against these ancient trucks. That's what made me think we must have done it somewhere James related, because he likes old broken down trucks.
Huh.
Where were they? I don't know.
There was a farm where Oakwood is now. It's not there
That's
anymore.
where the truck is. Yeah.
And I just assumed you recorded it somewhere beautiful,
No.
but it was right in Hollywood. You
No.
recorded such an
We
organic
recorded
album.
Sunset Sound.
And
Yeah.
both that and Tapestry coming had such a big impact on the culture, obviously, but on
Yeah.
us too. They were
Yeah.
both so beautiful in every way.
Yeah.
No, it's right. I mean, and yeah, Lou and I got it right in our respective projects.
You did for sure. So, looking back, is there any particularly proud moments where you think, I want to sit in this feeling again, reminiscing, where it just was great?
Mostly it was just the feeling of the joy of being right. You know, when people started to agree with me about how great James was.
Mm-hmm.
When people would suddenly go, this, you know, which, and of course with that you also get the haters, you know, as they call them these days, that where you see somebody, there was that famous critic who kind of took against James.
Yeah, in
Like,
Rolling Stone.
Oh, it's soppy, but no, it's when large quantities of people start to agree with you that this guy is as good as you've been saying all along, that's the joy of it. I mean, when Brian Epstein was going around saying the Beatles are going to be bigger than Elvis, and everyone was laughing at him, you know, he had the last laugh. And, you know, so there is that feeling of kind of, see, you know,
Yeah.
told you. You know,
Yeah.
he is that good.
And faith, yeah.
And Carol's that good, and James is that
Yeah.
good.
And like
The
the
Beatles were that good.
like the Beatles, James kept evolving as a songwriter.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you did the JT album,
Yeah.
which
He
especially
did-
for
He did a
guitarists.
couple albums. He did.
There's One Man Dog was
three,
before that.
Then he did 2 albums with Russ Sutherland and Lenny Waronker, Gorilla and In the Pocket.
Okay.
Then he did the album with David Spinoza, Walking Man, which I'm not crazy about, to be honest. And then he came back to me and we did JT, was the first Columbia record.
Yeah, which is a glorious album, and those songs are really quite sophisticated. Those
I
chords.
mean, I was
for
managing
guitar.
all the way through, but,
Yeah.
but as, he wanted to. And working with Russ and Lenny, I thought was a good idea, and they made good records.
I love that JT album. It's beautiful, great song. There
Thanks,
You
yeah.
Are, and There We Are. But also the One Man Dog album is great, and Mudslide Slim.
Yeah,
they're all
One Man
wonderful.
Dog we did up at the house. That's what we did on the vineyard.
But it's unusual for songwriters to start that strong, like Carolina, and keep evolving and
Yes,
being-
yeah.
just getting better.
Yeah, no, the good ones do. I mean, yeah, exactly.
So, what next? More shows?
Well, I'll do some more shows. I've got a bunch of stuff on the horizon. I do this radio show every week.
Yeah,
It's
on
an
Sirius,
awful lot of
Beatles show.
time and effort. So I've got to keep writing those. Keep thinking of things to say. And I write a lot of stuff, and I've just been recording a bunch because I'm going away. I'm doing a couple of cruises, hosting a '60s cruise and a '70s cruise in a row, and they're fun. They're interesting. And then I hope to be back in the studio. I do stuff with Hans Zimmer, for various movies. There's nothing we're working on together immediately, but there's always ends up being something that fits in, that I work on. That's why I keep the office here and stuff.
You've been writing some cool songs. The song you wrote with Dave Stewart, Love Always Comes as a Surprise,
Yeah,
from Madagascar.
From Madagascar 3.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, again, it's largely, if there's anything I'll take credit for, it's the fact that I'm fairly good at seeing opportunities and taking them. I mean, I've always jumped when there's been somewhere to jump. I mean, certainly in the beginning when I was a philosophy student at London University, I didn't expect to be a pop star a year later, When I was a pop star, I didn't expect to be managing somebody or producing records a year after that. And Dave and I were working with Hans on the score for Madagascar 2. He sometimes puts together a little group to work on some theme ideas he has. We were all in London working on a theme for Madagascar 2. And it was, we got to a scene where the lion falls in love with the jaguar on the trapeze, as one does. And they said, we're thinking about having a song written for this scene. because this could be their love theme throughout the movie. So at the end of the day, Dave and I went, okay, we went off and drank martinis and wrote the song, and thinking, well, before they ask somebody else, because they were going to go out and like look for writers. So we came in the next morning and said, here's your love song, and they all went, great, thank you.
Wow. Well, we both know Dave.
And we all thought it would. We were sure that it would change because all those giant budget movies, it's a committee, and everything always gets changed, rejected. Let's try something else, whatever. But in this case, they stuck with it. And then, even more oddly, they said, we love the song, go ahead and make a proper version of it. Because this was just a drunken demo on Dave's phone. So I produced the record of it, and then I put a demo vocal on with me singing. And then there was a big meeting about who should sing the song in the movie. And they were, and it was Jeffrey Katzenberg who went, this sounds fine. Peter should sing it in the movie. So that's how I got the gig. Jeffrey was probably thinking about how much they'd have to pay, Adele or someone to sing the song, So.
And Dave's such a great producer, but you produced that.
I produced it, yeah.
And I know, we both know Dave, that he writes songs quick. So you wrote that in one night after drinking some martinis?
Yes, we did, yeah.
And he gets those martinis correct. I know, you got to get it right.
Very good. We both take our martinis seriously.
You said once that you like to write songs more about other people, story songs, than write about yourself.
Well, I mean, the most successful songs I've written tend to be for a purpose. In other words, we wrote that song for a scene in a movie about these two characters. So, and about what they were experiencing. So I find that easier, yes. I'm not like James who'll write songs that, about his own thoughts.
Yeah, which is more like Lennon than McCartney. McCartney
so
liked those stories.
It's more of more of an arm's length, So they'd say, "What we need a song for this person," which James likes too. I mean, he didn't do that much of it, but when he was asked to write songs for a musical,
yes, for working,
when he wrote Mill Worker and Brother Trucker, they were great songs.
Yes.
Well, that's easy. Don't write about sensitive James Taylor. Write about something else.
Do you ever teach? Do you ever do master classes in any?
Not really. No. I mean, I get invited to come lecture a lot, but not so much a master.
If you were going to give a couple of things for young songwriters or new songwriters to walk away with, what couple?
It's impossible. You see, that's the annoying question is, what should I do next? I write songs, I sing. What shall I do? It's kind of impossible.
Write another one. Write a better
all
one.
I say is that if you start boiling it down to specific questions, which they often do, should I look for an agent? Should I look for a manager? Should I look for a publisher? Should I be out doing gigs? Should I form a band? The answer is yes to all of them. Should I let other people record my songs? Should I save them myself? Yes. Just do everything. Do anything that comes up, because you don't know which route you're going to take. People get all precious about, I shouldn't do that, or I shouldn't give this song to this person, or if they want it, if they're going to record it, give it to them. Write another one. Just work harder, do more.
Yeah. It didn't help.
All that.
Didn't hurt Carole King that James did her song. It didn't hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Logically, she should have said no.
Right.
Logically, some manager went, that's the best song you've written for ages. That's a hit song. Don't give it to someone else. But she just went, I like James. He'll do it well. Go ahead.
We got to wrap it up. But I did want to ask you one question. That, as a Beatles nerd, like so many of us, I've read every book about them. It seems there's this concentrated Beatles revisionism where every book gives credit a little differently. If you read George Martin's or Jeff Emmerich's or about Paul, do you find that they're changing the history, and do you think it's getting distorted? What really happened?
I'm sure it is, but I mean, I only know what really happened on the rare occasions I was there. But people ask me all kinds of detailed questions. I don't know the answers.
Well, one of the questions is George Martin. Some people believe he was the genius behind the Beatles, but they were writing the songs.
No, absolutely not.
And Jeff Emmerich said, they produced. George didn't really produce. Do you think that's true?
Well, he gets overcredited.
And even Paul and John tended to take credit for different things.
Yeah, they do.
Was it surprising to you at that level, Lennon and McCartney, that even at that level, I wrote some of that and they're kind of quarreling about things like that?
That's crazy, I know. And then there was that time when Paul was talking about switching the names around. It was just pathetic. It's weird. It's weird. That's what artists are like. Nothing you can do about it. But you really don't have to worry, Paul, about getting sufficient credit.
I agree with you.
Really don't. We all think you're one of the few genuine geniuses in the history of rock and roll, and leave it.
Leave it alone.
And all these songs you mentioned, they've all had just great melodies. You know,
Yeah.
do you think melody will always be important and will always have good melodies?
Yes, I hope so. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, I hope so too.
I'm sure it will.
That's a positive place to
Oh, yes.
wrap it up.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to talk to you, Peter.
No, I hope it all works out and is useful.
Yeah,
If
it's
you need anything else,
fantastic.
let me know.
I'm very honored to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
And that was Peter Asher.
That was fun. We went to his LA office, which was fun, where Hans Zimmer, the film composer, works too. And I'm glad I got to ask that because there's Beatles revisionism I keep reading where everyone's changing the story. And he knew George Martin well, like we said, his mom taught him. And he said, no, it was the Beatles who really were producing. Some people think George brought the genius, but they were geniuses on their own.
Yeah, I think Jeff Emmerich had said that too.
He did. He said it to me too.
Yeah?
Yeah, very, very intensely. Like he wasn't a genius, but you know, Jeff had his hands on. He was the actual engineer, was really doing a lot of that. And George seemed to take credit for a lot of things Jeff did.
You've spoken to everybody.
Well, Jeff, I just got him at a party. I had to talk to him because I loved his book so much, Here, There, and Everywhere, about the Beatles. It's a great Beatles book because he was right there. You know, I want to mention we have a wonderful theme song that we hear, and people said, is that Louise singing? And in fact, it is Louise Goffin singing and playing every instrument on that, and that's called Beautiful Crazy Plan, which is a wonderful song. You know, when we first started talking about this, you said, you know, I got this song that might work. It was the first song you sent me, and I thought, yeah, perfect. I never thought, let's hear something else. That's great, because I love it.
It was great that it worked. I had written it for a TV show on spec and submitted it, and they didn't use it. They ended up using a Bob Dylan song, and it was just sitting in my Dropbox folder. And it was one day I was at the gym, and I thought we were starting our podcast. Let me listen to Beautiful Crazy Plan. Yeah, I remember the day in the studio. I was just on fire, and I went and played some B3, put some guitars, played the bass. The drums are all finger drums. I was playing them all.
Oh, really?
They were samples, but I was playing the drum fills with my finger.
Wow.
And then I had Pat McDonald, my friend, co-writer. He was in Timbuk 3. I had samples of him playing harmonica, and I thought, oh, let me see if those Pat samples would fit in and stretch them and move them around. So,
They fit really well. I was amazed that that's how you did it.
yeah, so we
But I
got
love
a
it.
theme.
Yeah. You know, and that's happened many times where people write a song for a movie, like Dylan, who beat you out. He wrote Lay Lady Lay for Midnight Cowboy. They didn't use it, but you still get a great song.
Yeah,
And there's several of those, I think.
happens a lot.
Yeah. So thank you for writing that great one, and we get to use it.
And thanks for the credit.
Now, if you're enjoying the great song adventure out there and enjoying the adventure, now let us know on iTunes. That's a great place where you can leave comments and let other people know about it.
Yeah, it's a word of mouth thing. So tell your friends about it if you're enjoying it.
Yeah. Thank you for your support out there. Keep listening. We got good stuff coming up.
We are the Great Song Adventure.
Do it all so well, and you know it. Let your light shine, and know you show it. Mercy, joy, and success. Every day is a chance for